Good evening, Nevada Firearm Political Action Committee members, as well as Nevada Firearm Coalition members. We're pleased to have you join us this evening and extremely honored to have Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo joining us. So as we get our Zoom call populated, we'll give it a few minutes so people can be joining on. We just want to remind folks that we actually invited the sheriff back in April to be on this call, primarily to deal with issues to deal with Clark County Sheriff's Office. Just ironically, he decided to also run for governor. So we're going to be focused more tonight on his duties as Clark County Sheriff, but I'm sure we'll be talking about the governor's race as well. So we want to let you guys know that this is primarily to really talk about firearm issues in Clark County, but obviously has much broader applications now. So we'll wait probably give it another minute or so while people keep joining the call.
I'm showing 52. Is that what you're showing?
Yes, there you go.
I'm trying to learn how this works.
And we had quite a few more RSVPs, but we know how on a Thursday evening, it can take folks some time to get all dialed in.
Well, and I understand you guys got some serious rain down in Las Vegas today, so roads were slippery. We had hail up here, so we've definitely got some nice cooling, hopefully, weather. And what is the high today in Clark County, Sheriff?
Why do you keep asking questions? I don't know. The high the temperature right now is 93.
Oh, wow, you guys have cooled down a lot.
Well, because it's been overcast all day, and
Yeah.
And when you said a great deal of rain, that I can't agree with that.
Oh, really?
I saw a smattering of rain, but I have some bad news for you. I lost an officer today to COVID, so I've been dealing with that for most of the day. So,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
thank you.
That is not a good way to start your day.
No, not at all. So he's fairly young too, and only had 6 years on the department, and he has young kids, and so that's frustrating.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Well, Randy, I think we can probably get started, and I know we'll have some other folks joining us as we go. So
Okay. Well, thank you again, Sheriff Lombardo, for joining us this evening, and thank you all to our Nevada Firearm Coalition members for joining us. As I said, back in April, we requested Sheriff come and talk to us, primarily about some of the questions you guys have been sending us, things like background checks, why is it taking so long to get a CCW permit, and some of the impacts of the legislation that passed during the legislature. And then poof, he decides to run for governor. So we are going to talk about his governor's race, but primarily this evening, we're going to be talking about really the issues dealing with the firearms in Clark County and your role as sheriff. As always, we do have our chat box open as well as the Q&A box. And I know people are always courteous and kind in our questions. So we appreciate folks continuing that trend. So Sheriff, first, I just want to say welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Randy. But if I could just stop you for a second, you said the chat box is open, and I see those popping up here. Am I expected to respond while I'm talking here, or is that something you're going to orchestrate?
No, Megan is the one that responds to the chat box if people ask her questions, as well as any questions she can respond, like with information from our facility. So yeah, you don't need to worry about the chat box.
And Randy will keep an eye on it as well and feed in questions, though I know we have questions we could keep you here all night. So
yeah,
don't worry about the chat box. We will keep an eye on it for everyone. Please send your comments, your feedback, and Randy and I will watch for it.
There you go. But we did get numerous questions from our members prior to this, and so I'm going to hopefully touch on most of those. But first, welcome, Sheriff. And I think the first question I'd like to talk about is the backlog on getting CCW permits. And I know, being a Washoe County resident, I'm having to wait a good 2 months before I can even go in and get my fingerprints done. So let's just talk first about we know that sales of guns skyrocketed in 2020 and continue today. So first, what are those numbers, and how are you guys kind of addressing the backlog issues? And how much is the state involved in causing the delays, because they're the background check folks?
Right, and then, yeah, you're correct in that, Randy, and I appreciate the question. So I anticipation of that question, and I did a little research on our numbers here as part of the process, because I am the designated sheriff here in Clark County. So all the other associated police departments feed into my system as far as the CCW process, because as you know, the NRS defines the sheriff as the authority associated with CCW. So your first question was, what are those numbers been looking like? So I pulled those numbers. So if you look at well, you can't look at it. I have to provide it to you, sorry. 2017, 2018, 2019, we were averaging around 16,000 applications on an annum. And then from 2019, this is the significant piece, it shot up to 37,000 in 2020. So that's 164% increase. And so if you go to 2020 year to date, it's on the same pace. Currently we were looking at 18,600 year to date, so which will be close to what 2020 experienced at the same time last year. So that requires some significant oversight or some significant labor to address those particular numbers. So when it shot up in 2020, we moved 5 full-time employees over into the CCW detail to address that increase. And as you know, and I have no COVID-19 excuses. As you know, we are considered an essential operation. So I didn't have people at home. I don't have an excuse for COVID-19 like a lot of your government agencies you may have experienced. That was been their excuse for poor performance or lack of performance. But all my folks were here. So we were processing those as we could, but we were shut down. The front office was actually shut down for a short period of time. And then we went into all the COVID triage stuff that you imagine, social distancing, mask and all that. But it didn't really have an effect on us after the first couple months of shutdown with COVID. So I have no excuse in that space. So we rededicated 4 to 5. We had 4 full-time employees plus a supervisor to address the CCW backlog. And as we move forward, we went to the appointment system, and then we didn't allow walk-ins anymore. And so you've already described the problem, Washoe, you're experiencing with Washoe, but we have the same experience here in Clark County because, you know, I have the majority of the population in the state, and so I have to deal with it accordingly. And so we saw that we were getting close. We were creeping back up to the 120-day limit. So recently, as recently as 2 weeks ago, we put an additional 6 more people into the CCW program to address that issue. So let me give you some ideas of what's going on with the whole process and how we are only part of it. The state, you alluded to it, the state is the other part of it. So on an average, and now these numbers are about 2 weeks old, on an average, we touch the applications for 46 days, okay? And then on the average, the state touches them for 56 days. So that's 112 days it was taking you to get your CCW permit. So with the push of people moving over and an increase of the number of appointments we would take on a daily basis, originally it was 70 per day, and we increased that to 80 per day here recently. That was 3 days ago to accommodate those appointments. So with that, it's come down to about 109 days. That's what we're averaging right now. But there's another caveat in here I'm going to put into that I anticipate we're going to have a significant benefit in reducing those days with it. So, and that has to do with the state. So I guarantee you your viewers are going to be frustrated and they're going to be, what are you talking about? It's 2021. Technology is here and it should be a lot easier to do than how I'm going to describe it to you. And you're right, your viewers are right, but the government is quite often years and light years behind. Okay, so you come in, you do your fingerprints, you submit your application, and you get a photograph taken, and we electronically submit that to the state. Okay, because the state has to provide it to the FBI. They're the only designated government agency that can provide that application to the FBI. So the state has to physically mail that because they don't have the federated system in their IT system to email it. Okay, they did make an application in this legislature here recently to get the funding to update their system. They did receive approval for that, but they've told me it's going to be a year before it's fully implemented. Okay, so we can't really fix that portion. So when the state receives it and then they forward it to the FBI on an average takes 7 days to return your application to the state. And here's what the issue we identified, and this will frustrate the hell out of your listeners. The state has to mail your application back to us. And so what they were doing is they were stacking the applications until they had sufficient amount to make it cost inducive to them to ship the applications down. But included in those are sexual assault registrations and all the other licensing things we do as a police agency for the county. And they would wait for that stack to pile up before they would send it. And that would be on a 2-week basis. So we gave them the ability to use our Federal Express number. So they would do it on a nightly basis. So we receive applications, all the other applications that we have to go through the state to include CCW in the same Federal Express package, but we receive it on a daily basis now. So hopefully that's going to cut down another 2 weeks off your time associated with CCW. So that addresses one particular issue, the time it takes to get it done, okay? And I know there's been suggestions in the past, well, Sheriff, why are you limiting yourself? You have 10 other substations. Why don't they do the CCWs there in those substations? And I'll tell you why we don't do it. One is the system, the fingerprint system is all digitized now. And that machine itself costs $40,000. Okay, no, actually $32,000. I'm sorry on that. It's $32,000. The other $8,000 is the back end part of the machine, the server, the storage, the electrical, and everything else that goes along with computer systems. And then there's another, I'm going to be conservative now. I would have to re-outfit the substations to accommodate the fingerprint machine, the photograph room, and everything else that goes along with the CCW application. And that's to the tune of about $30,000 to re-outfit the substation. So, but if you're pushing that work out to the substations, that requires personnel, it requires labor. And that would require 2 to 3 people additional at the tune of $70,000, including salary and benefits. So about, what is that, 7 times 3, 210,000. So you're looking at a $300,000 endeavor in totality, with the increases over year and everything else. So it's not really a viable solution, and it's not something I want to pursue because I don't need to pursue it. And here's why. With the increase of people put over into records and eventually the ability to increase the number of appointments taken, I think we can get to that backlog sooner than later. So it won't take you up to 60 days to get an appointment, okay, or for you to come into records and process your information. So I believe that's going to be a good solution here in the next 2 to 3, 4 weeks to address that backlog. So hopefully I gave you a pretty comprehensive answer on the CCW issue. I'm not ignorant to it. I'm aware of it, and we're making adjustments to fix it because I understand that's an important need to your members, and I believe it's an important need to anybody. So I'm glad to help out in that aspect.
Well, thank you for that very comprehensive response.
Well, I did a little homework on it. I'm actually proud of my little homework on it because, it was a problem in the early throws when we had that significant increase in 2020, and it's continuing to be a problem now. So I think it's important for me to address that problem and find a solution for you. Not
And-
just
and-
for you, for me and everybody else. So.
Oh, yeah, and it's a challenge for everybody. I know I was told if I should have taken my test in Carson City so I can go to the Carson sheriff and get it done quicker. But one of the questions here is, how long should someone apply for renewal now with this backlog? I mean, obviously you're going to be able to catch up in a bit, but how much in advance should someone be applying for their renewal?
You know what? I'm at a loss on legally how far in advance you can apply. Okay. And I don't know, maybe one of your members may know the answer to that. But to be safe, if you have the ability per the law, I'm not, you'd have to educate me on that, and I can do my own education, but 2 months is a good window.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's 120 days before you can apply.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
So
it
you
has to
should
be
probably
120
start on
days,
119 days.
So that's part of the reason why I have a 120-day limit, because it's 120 days you apply out. So we don't want to go past those limits. So
I know for a while, we actually tried last legislative session to try to allow for, if there was a delay, especially like if you moved to the state and applied and didn't get it, that we could, if you had expired, your permit had expired, that you would have a little latitude there. But you're not pulling people over and citing them for their license being expired, I'm going to guess.
what license? Your CCW?
Your CCW permit.
registration?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So, but let me back up, Randy. I want to provide us some additional information. So there's 2 different ways to apply, right? And you know this, but let me express that to your members. Is one, you could do it electronically and you could pay electronically. So when you come down and submit your application or do your photograph or your fingerprints, all your paperwork is done. Okay. And hopefully, if it isn't 100% complete, that we can fix it in a short period of time when you come in with your appointment. Okay. The other way is when you have your appointment, you come in, you sit there and fill out the paperwork upon arrival. So that's about 50% of all the appointments. 50% are electronic, 50% are handwritten. So it gives you a little bit of an understanding. I just for informational purposes, so your members know that's the different ways that it's conducted. But here's the key point. If you look on our website, lvmpd.com, and you go through the CCW process, it says no walk-ins are allowed. That's been rescinded. Okay. So you can go down there, but here's the problem. If you're just a walk-in, you may be there 4 to 6 hours because you're intermingled with all the other folks that are doing police business as what we do every day, doing crime reports, getting work IDs, whole 9 yards. But we will not prevent you from doing that. Previously, we did because of the Qmatic system and the appointment system, but I gave them directions to stop that. Just if they show up, don't turn them away.
Well, that's good. Your comments about the state and its lack of technology. It's surprising how ill-equipped our state is on a technological from point. I mean, look at what happened with Dieter. We've all heard about the nightmares there, and they were given, I think,
that is a nightmare. That's truly a nightmare. So, and the frustrating piece on Dieter is there's a significant number of those cases are fraudulent. Mm-hmm. And there was a pretty substantial level of incompetence of not catching those fraudulent claims and doing something about it. So.
Yep. And when you're governor, good luck with that. So I think we've kind of gotten the CCW stuff. We appreciate that answer. And I know if there's other follow-up questions, we will gladly get those from our members and get them to you, sir. Let's talk a little bit about.
And the other thing, Randy, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Oh, yeah.
But, Randy Mackey, either you or Randy Thompson, please inform me, because you have access to me. Obviously, we've talked it before in the past. If you're seeing something occurring how I described it and it's not getting better, call me. You have that ability. You have access to me as you have in years past, and tell me, hey, you said you fixed the problem, but you didn't. I need to be aware of it. I got a big organization, right? So there's a lot of things that I have to occupy my time. So unless I'm aware of it, I won't know about it.
Well, and I'll tell you, our members are not shy about letting us know when they have problems. So we will definitely continue to keep those lines of communications open.
Thank you.
So the next issue, the big issue for us was the ghost gun bill, which I hate calling it ghost guns because it's unserialized guns. So let's talk a little bit about, it was AB 286, and there was two parts to it. We're going to stick first with the unserialized guns. First of all, as the lobbyist for Nevada Firearms, I've endured hours of hearings, and the Bloomberg people kept talking about how these guns are a growing menace and a growing element in the crime world. First of all, can you tell me how many times an unserialized homemade gun was used in a crime in Clark County?
Well, that's a difficult question to respond to, and here's why. There's a lot of crimes that we had guns utilized that we've never arrested anybody. So I can't give you a finite answer to that. But in particular to people that we've gotten into custody or in possession of a ghost gun, I get updated that on a regular basis because I know this is an issue for law enforcement and communities and the gun lobby. And when we talk about it is, so year to date, well, actually not year to date, I can actually use a 12-month window because we started tracking it around about summer last year. And we've had 6 incidences with ghost guns. Now, none of them were guns utilized in a crime. They were people in possession of them illegally, like in a CCW capacity. So they are encountered, and I can let you know right up front, they were encountered in the tourist corridors, people in possession of them. So it's not a big issue. But it's there.
And were those homemade guns, or were those guns where the serial number had actually been filed off?
Homemade guns.
They were, okay.
Serial numbers filed off is a whole different issue. It's a whole different number. I can't give you an actual number of that, but that is quite common. I'm here to tell you, with my 34 years experience in law enforcement, it's a very common crime. So.
And I think that's part of what we were trying to talk about during the legislature is it's not as much homemade guns, kit guns, people that are doing them, especially modifying them for their own use, for shooting. People have been making guns since America's been America. But the filing off of serial numbers becomes then a ghost gun. And that's a whole different type of a situation that we were trying to distinguish between the two in the legislature.
Right. And here's an important piece for the members to be aware of, and I'm sure you're aware of, I'm probably speaking to the choir, is, well, why is it a big lift to have a serialized gun? And part of the reason for that in the law enforcement vernacular, in other words, from my point of view, is when we encounter a gun utilizing a crime, a homicide, whatever it may be, we attempt to find the origin of that gun. In other words, we contact ATF, they have serialized, and that is from the original point of sale. So if it's sold since it was the first purchase, we have no idea where it's from, okay? But it can bring us back to the original point of sale to determine whether it was obtained fraudulently as a commission of a crime or a plethora of other reasons for that. So in the ghost gun world, we wouldn't be able to do that. They would, in other words, it assists us in investigation, but it's not a 100% hurdle for us. In other words, if you have an unserialized gun and we encounter it, it's not going to stop the investigation. It's just a little bit more information we could attain on the back end on the origin of that weapon. So it could have been part of a gun store robbery where they, attained 300 guns in a robbery, and that's how we know where the origin is. So it could bring it back to that.
Okay.
That's a real quick word picture on the serialization of guns and part of the problem when they're not serialized. So,
okay. Yes.
Is it a heavy lift for us? No, we can work around it.
Okay. So I'm not going to talk about the lawsuit that's been filed since you're named in it, but that's just because the residents there.
And I haven't figured out why I'm named in it.
Well,
I have
the
no idea.
residents, yeah, the residents are in Clark County, and so you'd be the one enforcing the bill or enforcing the law in Clark County. So
Well,
you and the DA are named. I
glad
had
you
to kind of
explained
look
it
that
to me,
up today.
Well, I'm glad you explained it because I asked my attorney and they didn't know.
Yeah. Well, I did read the lawsuit today in between, cups of coffee. But yeah, it said because they're residents and you'd be
I get
enforcing it.
sued probably 20 times a day. So
So this is nothing
it's hard
new.
to track down all that info.
Well, and I will say I've reached out to the lawyer that's filed the lawsuit, and we are going to be chatting with them next week to see really how we can help in that lawsuit. But so the bill says that if you possess this unserialized gun, it's a gross misdemeanor on a first offense, and on a second offense, it's a category D felony. So, couple questions here. First of all, do you know what that means on a second offense? So let's say you guys come to my home under a subpoena and you find that I have 2 ghost guns. Is that 2 offenses, and thus am I now subject to a category D felony? Or is it 2 separate incidences where I'm using a gun?
Naturally, the law naturally defaults to 2 separate incidences, not because
Okay.
you were in possession of 2 guns.
Okay. And bigger question, how do you foresee enforcing this law? Merely possessing a ghost gun is now illegal. Not that I've used it in a crime, not that I have any intent to use it, but merely possessing. How do you, as a law enforcement official, how are you gonna do this?
We don't say you had some cheesy ass informant that comes and says, "Hey, police, I know a guy who's got 2 ghost guns in his house." That is not something we're going to apply for a search warrant and go do something about it. We got a lot of other stuff on our plate, as you can imagine. So, and we are not proactive as a police department, nor would I give direction with the police department to be proactive in that space. Quite often I get presented, well, Sheriff, are you going to stand next to me when the government comes and does a gun grab? And I said, well, yeah, of course I will, but I don't see where the government would have the resources or ability or wherewithal to do that, nor how would they even know where the guns are, And so, but I would stand with you and say, no, this is unconstitutional. And it, and I always describe it, we don't live in Nazi Germany anymore. Okay. So they had enough Nazi soldiers to maybe do that, where they just kick your doors in without the Constitution and go do a gun grab and tear your personal residence apart. There's not an ability to do that in today's world. And if there was, I would stand with you to push back on that. And if elected governor, I wouldn't allow it either. So,
Well,
and that would have to be a federal mandate, and because it wouldn't happen at the state level. So.
Well, I raised the point, the constitutionality of this bill,
Right.
be it Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. And I will be honest, Sheriff, your guys weren't at the table with me in opposing this bill. But
Okay,
is
let me
that
ask you something, Randy? Who else was at the table with you?
well, I run that at that point? Well, it depends which part. I'll talk about the second part later. But I am kind of curious if Chuck and AJ did take a position on this bill.
Yeah, I asked Chuck about that, and they stayed neutral. So, but they didn't, they weren't with it, and they weren't against it. They stayed neutral because so where people sometimes get confused is we enforce the laws, we don't make them in the law enforcement community. Now, the governor has ability to opine on that and push the legislature in one direction or the other. And if elected governor, I would absolutely deny that bill. So, see, and that's where there's a distinction. A definite distinction is the legislature and the governor makes policy and laws. We are required as law enforcement to enforce it.
Right. Well, Chuck was at the table on the second part of AB 286, which
So
was
that was the neutral piece, right?
Well, he was in neutral, but he definitely expressed his concern. And this was over the essentially the part of the bill that, as we kind of jokingly said, you became the private security guard for MGM. But this was where MGM pushed wanting to have gun, if they believed somebody had a gun on site, that they could call
charged with the
Metro
crime.
and come and have them arrested. The bill, now it was odd to be at the table with the ACLU and the public defenders.
Yeah,
That
it
was
was
an
odd.
interesting
It
thing.
was interesting to hear their perspective.
Yeah, and Chuck
They
did talk
said
in
we
neutral
would,
about it.
We would profile people of color in that aspect.
Right.
So,
And so, but I gotta say that there was and has been some significant crime activity on the Strip. And I think MGM truly was trying to get to how do we reduce crime on the Strip? How has that been since, well, I know last summer, but specifically, how has the crime been and what are you guys doing to address the crime on the Strip?
yeah, and I'll correlate that crime on the Strip directly to the stimulus money. So if you look at the demographic picture, it became deplorable in the Strip corridor in downtown Fremont Street, directly correlated with the stimulus money. So people had a $1,500 check, whatever the amount was, put in their pocket, and they say, "Hey, let's go to Vegas." Okay. And so we were experiencing some significant issues with the demographics that were showing up down there. So what did I have to do? I had to adjust all my resources in our neighborhoods where we live and everything, and flood it down there, because here's an important piece, and sometimes people don't have a grasp on it, is the Strip and Fremont Street is the mother milk of Southern Nevada's economy. Okay. And that's it, man. If it goes down, which is 30 to 35% of all our visitors are repeat customers. So imagine us losing 30% of our customers based on the environment that's down in the Strip corridor. Hey, they get down there and they're from, say, a couple from Missouri, and they go, "Hey, this is ridiculous. I don't feel safe down here. I'm not gonna come back." So we couldn't have that environment. So to answer your first question is, we had to adjust resources, and it's 180 degrees different now. You may have some members on the line that don't agree with me, but I look at it in crime numbers, okay, and arrest numbers and seizure numbers and in the things that we do in law enforcement. And it's 180 degrees different now. So we got our arms wrapped around that. We're doing a pretty good job addressing the issues down there. But let's go back to the bill brought forward by the casinos to make it a criminal offense. And Chuck, I know for a fact, Chuck said, "Hey, the existing laws are sufficient. We don't need to create another law in particular to address guns." He said the existing laws, you could do it under the trespass statute. And the casino industry testified, well, when we call you for a trespass, it takes you, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours to respond. And sometimes we just let the people go. And so I had Chuck research that, and that's an absolute false. So it was, the existing law is sufficient, and we should just leave it alone.
And that's part of the reason why the bill didn't go anywhere, because I think that message was heard, despite what even the Black Caucus was saying, that it was racial profiling, or ACU calling it stop and frisk. They had the ability under the trespass laws to do this.
And to be frank with you, I don't know if they were building off 1 October and their concerns of that, but that's apples and oranges. You're describing an incident, a one-off incident that it doesn't meet what they were trying to achieve with that bill. So,
yeah. So I'm going to change tack a little bit. Universal background checks passed. Well, we had the voter initiated one, and then the 2019 that specifically dealt with private party transfers. And after the passage of the background check bill in 2019, many rural sheriffs came out saying they were not going to enforce that law. And some are saying now that they're not going to enforce 286. So first of all, as sheriff, how did you feel about those decisions that some of those rural sheriffs were making? Essentially saying we're not going to follow the law.
Well, there's a difference between a law and the ability to enforce a law. Okay, so there's a lot of laws on the book that we don't have the ability or resources or time to enforce. Okay, and in this case, we don't have time. In my jurisdiction, I can't speak for their jurisdiction. we don't have to, it was a non-starter for me. It's non-issue for me because we don't have time to enforce it. Okay. If say a private party went into an FFL, they're going to conduct the background checks and the seller was trying to sell to a prohibited person, or even the seller wasn't allowed to be selling to a prohibited person or a regular citizen, they're not going to call us because we're not coming. All right. We don't have that ability to do it. We don't have the resources to do it, nor do we have the wherewithal or concern for it. And I think it's very rare that a prohibited person will end up in a gun store doing a background checks and think they're going to get away with it. So we don't get those calls.
So did you support the universal background check bill?
Yes, I didn't support the private party deal, the way it was designed, how far they reached into the family units and all that. What I didn't, also I was very frustrated with. You remember when that bill was presented, there was 16 of the sheriffs said they didn't support it. I was neutral on it, and people said, well, being neutral means you support it. I go, no, absolutely not. I said the language in the bill, I support universal background checks. I support people that shouldn't have guns, shouldn't have the ability to get guns. And, granted, there's always that mantra, well, crooks are going to get them no matter what. The universal background check isn't going to fix it. That doesn't mean you don't create a system to prevent bad guys from getting guns, which they shouldn't have. But the language was really written poorly in that bill. And so the reason why I was neutral on it, I supported the background concept, but the way it was written was flawed. And I said, so I didn't 100% was against it. And that's why I was different, because out of the 16 or the 17 counties, 16 said they didn't support it. I said, my policing, everything I do, Randy, is from a policing mindset as a sheriff, not as a private citizen. So when I look at it, how is this going to affect law enforcement and their ability to do their job and prevent criminals from getting implements they shouldn't have? So I look at it from a little bit different perspective than, Eureka County, okay? Because I deal with the 300,000 tourists a week down on Las Vegas Boulevard. And for information, that's where 90% of our guns are coming from, down on Las Vegas Boulevard. So people that from out of state coming in and committing crimes and do what they do. So I said, no, I can't support it because it's written poorly and it's too intrusive and it goes too far.
Well, I know that question has come up and I think you've answered that.
Yeah, hopefully I did answer it. And that's been my position. The problem is when people hear bits and pieces of an answer, they form their own opinion and it's usually negative. And we got to get away from that, especially when it comes to me, because, I've been carrying a gun for 34 years as a police officer, and prior to that in the military, and I'm pro Second Amendment. Okay. But it's a very huge responsibility to own a firearms, no matter how some people may see it. In my opinion, it's a huge responsibility.
Well, safe storage has been a big issue. And currently the Clark County school system is urging a letter to parents in the Clark County School District to essentially safely store your gun. And you have talked several times, I've heard, about how we have got to prevent guns from being stolen. And the 2016 Department of Justice study of prisoners that used guns in crimes, 90% of them got the gun through either being stolen or purchasing it illegally. And that's why I think some people say, why do background checks? But background checks will hopefully prevent some of the bad guys getting guns.
Yeah,
but 90% are still bought illegally. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just because, if the majority is not in our favor, that means it doesn't mean we can ignore it. If we can help in that space, it's all for the better. And I think it's important for people to realize that, law-abiding citizens, just like your members and me and everybody else in society that choose to own a gun, go for it, buddy. You could have as many as you want. I don't care. But the storage of it, the safety of it, your ability to use it is very important. And if we have the ability to keep it out of a criminal's hands, and it's a simple process, and you know, we can talk about whether it's simple or not. I think it could be streamlined a lot better and a lot quicker, and make it easier on everybody. We have to address that. You know, we got to get involved in that. If we can prevent 1 here, 2 here, 1 a week, you know, 12 a year, you know, that's better for everybody.
Agreed. So there's a couple of questions about constitutional carry, meaning you don't need to have a CCW permit to conceal carry, as well as becoming a Second Amendment sanctuary state. And that touches a little bit on a governor's race, but also just on your stance personally of where are you on constitutional carry?
I don't support it. And here's why. And I've alluded to it a couple times. You know, a lot of people get frustrated because of the process. The CCW process is taking too long and everything else. And I understand it. Why can't we just be constitutional carry like in other states, some other states, and get past all this? And the reason why I say I can't support it is because there's training associated with a CCW permit. And so right now, if you go out and purchase a gun, you can do it free will. But there's no training with it. And I think there should be some training associated with the CCW because it's concealed, how you carry it, how you conduct it, how you're in the public space and whether you have a proper security of it and you know, preventing other people from seeing it. You know all the nuances of a CCW, and that training is a very important piece. And if we don't require it, people won't do it more often than not. We live in a society, the simpler it is, the more we want it. And I think that a training piece is important. And that's why we don't accept CCWs from every state. You know, we're reciprocal to the states that have some modicum of training associated with obtaining that permit.
That makes sense.
You know, and it's a lift on the front end, Randy.
Yeah.
You know, you do it on the front end, you're good, man. You know, 5 years later, you got to do it again. It's not that cumbersome. So.
Well, and with rights come responsibilities. And I think the CCW course teaches you those responsibilities.
And here's the other thing, you know, I want to go back because I missed it. And it's important for your listeners to hear this from me. I am the sheriff that got rid of blue cards. Okay. That was a promise I made in my first election, and I followed through it. I forced the county's hand on that, and Clark County was the only one that had blue cards. And for those of you who may not know, that's de facto gun registration we had within the county. And I got rid of that process. I thought it was ignorant from the beginning. I thought it was cumbersome for the gun owner, and there's no need for it. So, you know, for those of you who may not know, every single gun, you know how a CCW is encompassing no matter what weapon you have. The blue card, you had to register every single gun. So if you had 20 guns, every one of them had to have a blue card associated with it. And if you were stopped and you were in possession of it and you didn't have the blue card, we would seize your gun.
Well, you supported that as well as preemption. That was a big issue in 2015. We need a consistent law throughout our state. And
yeah, and that's what happens. The states that don't have preemption, you go from one county to the next, you don't know if you're going to get arrested or not.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have stated back, I think back in 16, about a capacity limit, that you were supportive of a capacity limit for magazines. Where are you on that? Essentially, if the legislature passed a bill, which has come up several times, at least questioned, that you'd be limited to 10 bullets in a magazine, would you veto that bill? Would you support it? I never, when I said high capacity magazine, I never put a finite number on that. And I've seen something in the media recently about where I mentioned 10 rounds, and no, that's not accurate. I've never mentioned 10. What I did say is, here's the reason why I even brought that up way back then. And remember, it's from a law enforcement perspective. So we in law enforcement, when we encounter a critical incident, a mass shooting, the only time we've ever had the upper hand in that, besides an overwhelming force, but if it was an individual officer, is when the assailant, a suspect, had to change the magazine. We had 1 or 2 seconds to intervene and hopefully stop the threat. That was the context of that question.
So, Sheriff, and what would you consider? I said, well, high capacity magazine I would consider because of this ability for law enforcement to intervene. And then the other part of that was, well, what's a high capacity magazine? I said, you know, whatever the manufactured specs were for that gun when you purchased it, whatever that gun came with the magazine. And I said 30 rounds is probably about right. You know, I couldn't really understand the need for more than 30 rounds. But in particular, I was concerned more with the 100-round magazines, you know, or the drums, right? And and the example I would give is 1 October. You know, here's the poster child for what the statement I made. And granted, it's a one-off incident. It's not like the everyday gun owner or the recreational shooter. But this individual still had 5,200 rounds available in that hotel room. And those rounds were stacked in 40-round and 100-round magazines. So changing barrels on guns, barrels overheating, opportunity for law enforcement to intervene. Changing magazines on those rifles, opportunity for law enforcement to intervene. And subsequently, he saw us at the door, all right? And so we had the opportunity to intervene at that point because he was moving from room to room, trying to get another rifle because the barrel was too hot. And he took his own life because he saw us come, you know, about to come in the door. That's what I'm describing. That's why when we're talking about high capacity magazines, that's what I was talking about. And hopefully that makes your membership more comfortable in that explanation. When I talk about it from the perspective of law enforcement. So the second part of that question is, well, if you're a governor, what would you do on that? It's a non-starter. It's not even a discussion for me to have. So, and it's not like we're going to go out, if that's passed federally, we're going to go out and get people's magazines. I don't see that happen. What it could do is prevent manufacturer to continue to manufacture them. That's what the federal government may have the ability to do.
On a kind of a personal note, how did October 1 change your view of guns?
Didn't.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is, in this case, it wasn't the gun, it was the mental stability of the assailant. We determined through our investigation that mental disease started to creep in on this individual, and I believe that's why he did what he did. The gun wasn't the cause, it was him.
And why does that message keep getting lost? Why do politicians continue to make gun the issue and not the person? And how is you transitioning to a potential governor? How can you help change that mind frame, that mindset, that it's not the gun, it's the person?
Well, it's an education piece, right? I mean, it's too easy for the liberal side of the brain to jump on that and utilize that. You're jumping on people's mindset, and it's an easy answer to pander. In my question, in my answer, in my thought process, it's easy to answer to pander that because it's a math problem to them. How many people support gun control versus people that don't? And, and I don't know where those percentages are, but I would probably assume that they're more for gun control than they are, and that's why they pander to that. And I think it's more of an education piece. It's frustrating for us, and you're going to talk about red flags, and I'm happy to talk about that because it's frustrating for us as law enforcement. So here's what happens with the process. Say you are determined to have mentally unstable or a diminished mental capacity. You go before the court. The court determines you are a prohibited person because your mental capacity, and the court's duty is to notify the state and identify you and prevent you from purchasing firearms into the future, okay? We don't have that information, Randy. So if a patrol officer stops you on the street, I have no idea whether you're a prohibited person when we encounter you. The only people that do is if you go into a gun store and FFL pulls you up, they have that information. So that's the frustrating piece for me. So when we're talking about addressing the issue with our mental capacity versus ownership of guns, that's the gap in the system. So when you ask, well, how do you fix it? That's how you fix it. All right.
So you brought up the red flag bill, which did pass last session, 2019. And I talked to AJ and Chuck.
They did some modification this session, didn't they?
Well, just what I was bringing up, they brought up some modifications. And I remember talking to Chuck and AJ, your lobbyists, about it. And originally, the bill originally had revoking the ability for a family or household member to file an ex parte or extended order. And I actually kind of liked that because it put more onus on law enforcement.
Well, I like it too.
Yeah, but it was revoked because of the Bloomberg people. So I know this was primarily a judiciary bill, if I remember right. I don't think it was a law enforcement bill. But why did you like that a family member couldn't just say, hey, my ex-husband's gone crazy and he has a gun, and come pick him up?
I didn't like that.
Right. Okay. But so that's what I'm saying is you guys like the law enforcement part.
Because it's too willy-nilly. A family member doesn't require some investigation and due process. They just go in there because they don't like you and, say, hey, I'm applying for a red flag order, and have law enforcement come get these guns out of the house. Okay. So, and the difference between ex parte and a regular order is ex parte is given by the judge without any process, without any hearing from witnesses or the suspected individual or the family members, okay, or law enforcement. They just all based off the application. So I wanted that converted to a legal order, in other words, a regular order, so everybody could come in there and provide testimony. Why do you believe this should happen? Law enforcement minus the family. Why do you believe this order should be issued? I thought that was more appropriate. Okay, providing the due process. You're impinging on somebody's Second Amendment right? So it requires some due process. And law enforcement is more well-versed in that space than an emotional family member, okay? So here on Metro, we've had 2 applications for the red flag since its implementation, okay? And both of those were in the counterterrorism space, okay? And for your information, we'll go back to Randy, the problem you identified with the state, they've never filed those red flag orders. They've never processed them. And their excuse is, well, we don't have personnel to do it. It's 2 orders. What do you mean you don't have personnel to do it? So they're using that as their support and their backbone to get what they want out of the system. So we've never been granted that, ever. So, and the direction I gave, it's even more limiting in my department. I don't know how other departments are planning to implement it, but only an investigative function within the police department can enforce that order. Because a patrol officer, because when they say officer, that could be anybody. A patrol officer doesn't have the ability to do a thorough investigation and process that with full knowledge of the incident, where a detective does. They absorb it and they process it. So I made it a matter of procedure here that only a certain detective units on the department could do that. Knowing it's a constitutional issue, and the last thing I need is to be able to have to spend thousands and millions of dollars defending myself for improper action.
I found it interesting that the numbers were so low in the red flags that when Chuck and AJ told me you didn't have a lot of them. So
no, we don't, because it goes back to that what I told you before. We don't have a lot of knowledge based on people's mental state. We don't have access to the information. We have to make our own evaluation on scene. So
transitioning, we've got you for at least another 5 minutes, if not longer, I hope. Transitioning to the governor's race. Why? Okay. What are you thinking, dude? What's motivating you to run for governor?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a Republican, been a Republican my whole life. A lot of people don't know that because the sheriff's race, my 2 elections, it's a nonpartisan race, okay? And I've won it twice in a Democratic predominant county. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't have an issue, but what I have an issue with is our American government system is based on the 2-party system, right? It's a push and pull system, and then eventually hopefully you get to consensus and we're all better because of it. In our current makeup of the state government, the legislature, both Assembly and the Senate is Democratic. The Attorney General's Democratic, the Lieutenant Governor's Democratic, and the Governor's Democratic. That's a failed system. If you look at the history of our government, that's a failed system. It's groupthink, it's special interest think. I've heard some of the other candidates say it's socialism. I don't know if it's gone that far yet, but it probably will. And I can't put up with it. And I think I have a better path than any other candidates on the Republican side to change that. And the most change can be affected at the governor's position. And that's the reason why.
So what are your main critiques about Governor Sisolak? I'm sure it's a long list like all of ours, but.
Well, I mean, let's start from the beginning. Crisis management. We talk about the pandemic and issues associated with that, and his quotes of saying, I'm relying on the science, but nobody was ever provided the actual science. So he was picking the winners and losers. So when we were talking about essential and non-essential and whether your livelihood is going to be shut down or not, it was too willy-nilly. He was moving the goalposts on a continual basis. And he was relying on me and all the other law enforcement agencies out there and all the other government agencies to enforce his desire. And it was very hard for me to quantify or agree with or understand his direction. And you can argue about the constitutionality of those directives. If appointed governor, I'm going to make sure that I appoint constitutional friendly judges, because the governor has that authority and that ability. And one of the key things to me that it's a stick in my craw when we were talking about science. So, you make the decision to shut down. Okay, that's an easy decision because we didn't know what we didn't know. So then we started gaining knowledge. We said, okay, 25% occupants. Okay, I don't know if anybody on the air has a restaurant, but you ain't making it on 25%, right? You're barely making it at 90%, right? Okay, 25% occupancy. Okay, so all the numbers are meeting the criteria that you put forward. And so the requests by the counties who he gave authority to, you decide when you want to go to 50%. Okay, but supply me the information. So they said, all right, we're meeting all the criteria. We want to go to 50%. Nah, you're going to go to 35%. Explain to me. I see you roll your eyes, right? Explain to me where 35% comes from. Okay, so now I'm asking my people who have to enforce this, hey, when you go in there, hey, Sheriff, I'm sorry, I don't know what 35% looks like. You want us to walk around and count people, and what is 25 to 35% in a restaurant? Half a table, so those are the reasons. So when you ask crisis management, special interest, there's two factions that are running the state government. It's not the governor, it's not the legislature, it's the teachers union and the culinary union. And you can't have a vibrant economy based on that paradigm. And so those are the things that have to be fixed.
I would just add the trial.
Education is a continual discussion, right? So
yeah.
There's been removal of early education under Governor Sisolak's regime. And early education is something that will change our ranking from 50 to 25 overnight. And what I'm talking about is pre-K, 4 to 5 years old. That's been removed from the priorities of the school districts via the state and their direction. And then workforce education. We've really gotten away from, the blue collar. I'll use that term because that's a common term. It's not derogatory. It's just an easy way to describe it. Trades that are the backbone of America and the backbone of most economies in every state. That education has been removed from both the high school, early youth, and community college level. So, and that's the answers to the education piece. The other answer to the education piece is don't don't require quotas on graduation from high school. And there's a lot of and I speak from a position of knowledge on this. There's a lot of graduating seniors that shouldn't be graduating because it's a fictitious number that needs to be presented. And I think it's important for people to realize that and understand it. You get schools that are professing 90% student population going to college. But what classes are they taking in college? Remedial classes, because they're way behind. So it's important for people to realize that and force mandates upon the school district for accountability and development. The read by 3, that was removed. That needs to be re-implemented. So there's a lot of things that go with education. Education builds a diversified economy. And so you got to go from a low skill to high skill to be successful.
The only group I would add to your teachers union and culinary is the trial lawyers, because being a small business lobbyist like I am, as well as firearms, they were killing us this year on so many issues of liability for COVID and stuff. So that's just the other group that controls
not just liability and COVID and everything. It's police reform, right? Mm-hmm. Defund the police, the mantra, and unintended consequences as a result. So you got bail reform, sentencing reform, handcuffing of police. All that matters, and that's indicative of the crime rates that are occurring across the United States right now.
So one of the issues is if you're a prohibited possessor and you go in and try to buy a gun, that's against the law, right? Are we enforcing that anywhere?
We would have to be called on that, right?
Right.
So what happens is when you go in there and you're prohibited, best of my knowledge, that guy says, no, can't do it. Sorry, get out of my store. Nobody's called, nothing occurs on that. But what we did do prevent the guy from being able to get a gun. He may be able to go to the one around the corner and do it, or on the street, but we can't look at that in a negative way. It's a positive way. We did help in some aspects.
But I gotta tell you, there's so many bills this past session and the session before. We tried to get a bill that if you use a gun in a crime, it's an additional 2-year sentence. Nope, legislature wouldn't have it. So it's amazing how we keep, bail reforms, and now we don't, now we've decriminalized parking tickets and speeding tickets.
But you're right. I mean, that's a perfect example of the problem, right?
Yeah.
So you're presenting, you're friendly to that, an increase in the level of punishment associated with the use of a gun, right? Mm-hmm. But the crooks are getting more rights than the victims.
Yeah. Yep. Well, AB 222, I don't know if you won't remember the number, but it essentially said that cops can't arrest people if they're trespassing. And as a small business owner myself, who has people that harass my staff, we could not have a cop come and have that person removed from the property. The bill was luckily amended. That was Dallas Harris's bill, but there was a case where essentially it told the cops how to do their jobs. And in an era like defund the police, how challenging has it been to just do your job and keep our streets safe?
Yeah, it is extreme challenging. And it's even more simple than you describe it. I mean, a cop is, and I'll be frank with you, it's just like any job. It doesn't matter if it's a cop or anything. If you're not supported by the people that you serve, you're going to change your work effort. And, they create a de facto de-policing and defund the police just by their actions and whether they support us or not.
Well, I know we're past 6:30. I appreciate your time. I know Charles Smith has said criminals already have constitutional carry. Kind of a pertinent point. That's true there.
It's true. Well, let me just give you my opinion on that. Yeah. Okay. They have constitutional carry by de facto. I mean, it's not, that's not in legal terms. Right? But who are the majority of people that have guns? Legal gun owners, okay? And criminals are a smaller fraction than that. And, you want to address the majorities versus the minorities in that space. And that doesn't mean, I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying it, we're still doing a benefit by having people trained, because most people that have guns are legal gun owners, and it's important for them to have trainings. And I guarantee you, the people on your membership and you yourself, you see nothing wrong with people having training on how to handle a firearm. And I think it's important for people to realize that.
Yep. And there is a question that keeps coming up, being a sanctuary two state. I mean, a sanctuary Second Amendment state would you support that if it came to your desk as governor?
I don't know what that means. What is that?
Okay. Well, essentially that the Second Amendment takes precedent over any of the other issues that keep coming up on the gun grabs or the background checks or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that does take precedent.
Yeah. And that, as it should. I know.
Right.
Would there be any laws, as the governor, you have control to bring forward legislation? Would you consider revoking the red flag law? Would you consider revoking some of the gun-free zones that most of us just call crime meccas because they know that people are unarmed?
Well, we know gun-free zones don't work, right?
Yeah.
And usually, I mean, that's where preemption, I think that's less than the preemption of the state, the gun-free zone. That can be determined by the local municipality, but that doesn't work. I mean, the signs, just because it's a sign doesn't mean it works, right? And we see people running red lights every day, right? And so, no, but as far as the red flag piece, I think that law has gotten too convoluted. It's missing its original intent, and it's not benefiting either side of the house. So, yeah, to answer your question, yes, I would consider repealing it.
Well, we've already gone past our time. I appreciate your time. Why don't you wrap it up with a little plug for where we can learn more information about your race for governor?
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for asking. And so all my internet access and social media and all that will be stood up on this coming Tuesday. And I'm doing my formal announcement Monday. I'm going to do it right here in Southern Nevada at Rancho High School, where I graduated high school. I think that's pretty cool. And then it shows you, I've been in this state for a long, long time. I think 45 years. So I'm a son of a military man. I was born in Misawa, Japan. So we migrated here via Nellis Air Force Base, and I chose to stay here and join the police department. Been here for 30 years. I got a little bit off tangent there, but okay. I want everybody to know I'm doing my announcement. I'm doing my announcement on Monday. I'll do some press interviews on Monday, and then subsequently I'm making a trip up to Northern Nevada to see you, Randy, and the whole crew. And up there, I'm going to spend a week up in Northern Nevada to hit all the counties in Northern Nevada. And then I'll come back home at the end of the week, and then we start moving forward from there. So,
well, Sheriff,
no sheriff has ever been elected. No law enforcement has ever been elected governor. I know there's two in the United States are going to attempt it this cycle, one in Michigan and in Nevada, and we have a chance to make some history here.
Well, and the leading candidate in New York is a former police officer for mayor.
Yeah, he was a former captain, right?
Yeah, so I think
is he the leading candidate?
He is the leading candidate. He got 30% of the vote in their Democrat primary. So I think at a time when we are talking about defunding the police, I just want to say thank you for your service, and thank you for keeping our state and our community as safe as possible as you can. And we know running for office is not easy, and you're going to get a lot of questions. You're going to get a lot of tough questions, but we appreciate you taking the time tonight to talk to us and being very open and honest about how you feel about some of these issues. I got to remind our folks that there's not a lot of cops that are going to sit there and say, let's get more guns in people's hands, because they're dealing with it every day. Right. So it's tough to be an officer and be pro-gun. But I know that you're there protecting the people, and you want to keep the honest people honest, and you want to put the bad guys behind bars. And that's really all we can ask you to do at the end of the day.
Right. You're exactly right. And I appreciate those comments there, Randy. You're absolutely right. So I'm looking forward to it. And here's one thing I just want to build off one of the things you first said. You appreciate me giving you some good answers or some direct answers, and that's what you're going to get from me. I mean, and that comes from, decades of being a law enforcement officer. I'm not going to bullshit you. I'm not going to have the traditional response of a pandering politician and squishy. I guess that's the word they use now, squishy, right? Yeah. I'm going to get you how I feel, and either you like it or you don't. And I think I'm in a good space there.
Well, no bullshit would be a refreshing change from most politicians, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, we want to thank you, Sheriff. We want to thank you all for joining our call tonight. It is recorded, and Megan will make it available for folks to view. And again, Sheriff, good luck. I look forward to meeting you on Monday night, and good luck in your run for governor.
All right, thank you. Have a good night, everybody.